Every time he touched the ball, stadiums held their breath. He wasn't just fast.
He was inevitable. Kick it to him and pray.
That's how teams faced Devin Hester.
You once said Jay Cutler is the worst leader you've ever played.
They said greatness was about stats. He proved it was about moments.
The debate refuses to die down. Devin Hester's name on the ballot forces a question many thought would have an obvious answer. Is greatness only for the traditional positions, or can a return specialist be immortalized in Canton? Critics quickly dismissed the notion, arguing that his role was too narrow, his statistical contributions too isolated, too limited when compared with wide receivers, quarterbacks, linebackers, or safeties whose numbers stretch across stat sheets. And yet, in the same breath, they admit, no player ever sent more shivers down the spines of special teams coordinators. Hester's highlight reels are studied like art, sudden swerves, broken angles, kickers left stranded and hopeless. He redefined the atmosphere of a football game in one touch, and for countless fans, that alone makes the question of his Hall of Fame legacy rhetorical. If football is about impact, if football is about moments, how can a man who delivered some of the most unforgettable bursts in league history not be celebrated as one of its greats? But to understand Hester, you have to go back to where speed was not just athletic, but survival. Hester grew up in Riviera Beach, Florida, a place of sun, salt, and struggle. When he was very young, his life was upended by tragedy with the sudden passing of his father. That kind of loss, heavy and permanent, could have derailed a childhood. For many, it would have, but Hester leaned into family for stability. His mother, his siblings, his community, they became not only his support system, but also the source of resilience that carried him forward. It was in those years that hardship trained something in him no coach ever could, the ability to keep moving, to always find acceleration even when life pressed against him with immovable weight. Sports became his outlet. Track sharpened his speed, letting him stretch out each stride like a knife cutting through water. Football gave him energy, structure, and a stage. From a young age, it was clear this was no ordinary athlete. Defenders chasing him in Pop Warner and high school games looked helpless, straining at air while he flew downfield. Speed was the obvious gift, but behind it was something deeper. Hester ran like there was more at stake than a game, as if each touchdown was an answer to personal loss, a declaration that tragedy had created not defeat, but determination. His talent was not shaped just by body mechanics or training drills. It was born from raw emotion, from an inner drive welded to his legs. His acceleration, his cuts, his elusiveness, all of it combined into something that felt bigger than sport. The foundation of a legend waiting to be recognized once the lights grew brighter. That stage arrived at the University of Miami. In the early 2000s, there was no hotter laboratory for future NFL stars. The Hurricanes were stacked with talent, swaggering into every game with eyes on championships. For Hester, this was both an opportunity and a challenge, to be noticed among giants, to earn his own headlines in a roster of future pros. He did not enter politely. He entered at full speed. He lined up at cornerback. He tested himself at wide receiver. And of course, he seized every return opportunity he could. Coaches tried to figure out where best to place him, what single role might maximize his gifts. The truth? Nowhere and everywhere. He was a pure playmaker, and he refused to be limited by the diagram of a playbook. Fans in Miami knew they were witnessing something different. They'd seen stars before, but Hester carried unpredictability, a game-breaking ability that could shift the tone of an entire matchup in seconds. He might catch a pass and weave his way 70 yards. He might take a punt that should have been routine and turn it into a highlight that exploded across television screens. Scouts wrestled with him. Some scribbled doubts about polish, about technique, about the lack of refinement in his defensive back skills. Others grumbled that he wasn't tall enough, strong enough, or disciplined enough to lock down a permanent position. And yet, every doubt was held against the undeniable tape. Clips that showed angles collapsing like paper walls the instant he set his hips and accelerated into daylight. This was the paradox of Hester. NFL organizations craved clarity. They preferred prospective rookies who fit into neat categories. players who promised predictability and permanence. Hester offered neither. What he offered instead was chaos, potential, mystery, and perhaps the rarest form of athletic ability, the power to force everyone else to rethink how the field even worked. Hester was the kind of player who shredded not only defenses but expectations. By the time he left Miami, one fact had become unavoidable. He was not a mold follower, he was a mold breaker. And whichever NFL team drafted him would need to abandon the thought of forcing him into just one role. They would need to accept that his value was not bound by statistics alone, but by the very fear he could inject into an opposing sideline. And with that, the NFL came calling. The league was about to learn what Hurricanes fans already knew. Devin Hester was not just a player. He was a phenomenon waiting to erupt. In 2006, the Chicago Bears made a decision that barely stirred headlines. They drafted Devin Hester in the second round, a player some scouts struggled to define. Cornerback? Wide receiver? Return man? Nobody knew quite what he would be. What nobody imagined was that he would change the way the NFL thought about the kicking game forever. His rookie season was an explosion. Like a spark catching dry grass, touchdowns spread everywhere, on punts, on kickoffs, even on a missed field goal. Defenses that had no fear of kicking suddenly had to think twice. Chicago had found a weapon that didn't just score points, it terrified opponents before the ball was even snapped. Then came the greatest showcase, Super Bowl XLI, opening kickoff. The ball floated into Miami's humid night sky. Hester caught it, veered into open space, left tacklers frozen, and sprinted 92 yards to the end zone. The very first play of the biggest game in football became his masterpiece. It wasn't just a touchdown. It was football history unfolding in real time. Fans, commentators, even opposing players realized they weren't watching a return. They were watching a revolution. A highlight so iconic it would alter how teams approached special teams strategy. Over the next seasons, Hester's reputation only grew. Touchdowns piled up. Entire game plans were rewritten simply because of him. Some teams refused to kick his direction at all, giving away field position rather than risk disaster. He became less of a returner and more of a psychological weapon, an asterisk that hovered over every coach's playbook. Eventually, the league itself adjusted. Rule changes made kickoffs safer, but also limited opportunities for returns. For Hester, this meant fewer chances to shine, and critics pounced. He wasn't a Hall of Fame receiver, nor did he dominate on defense. Was his body of work too narrow to be immortalized? But supporters pointed to something less quantifiable. No one else had tilted the game in quite the same way. Hester forced punters and kickers, entire units of professionals, to abandon their plans. His very presence altered strategies, frightened opponents, and thrilled millions of fans. So the question lingers, how do we define greatness? By the volume of traditional stats, or by impact so unforgettable it reshaped the sport itself? For many, the answer is clear. Devin Hester belongs among the greats because every time the ball touched his hands, the game felt alive in a way numbers could never explain.